Hey, it's Alex from Remote Work Life here, and I'm really happy today. We have a really good guest, a really great guest. I've got Badri Rajasekhar with me today. He's the CEO of Jam. Now, Jam is a tech business, and Jam's very different. And the reason I've got a massive smile on my face is because Jam is all about having fun. And, when we're as remote workers, especially in this current climate, we not many people are speaking about having fun, but this is what Jam is all about because Jam is a lightweight video collaboration app for remote teams. So think about if Slack and Zoom were to have a baby. This is basically what Jam offers. So, like I said, massive smile on my face because we're going to be talking today about having fun with remote teams. So, Badri, I just wanted to say a massive thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Alex. Super excited to be here, and I hope everybody's safe out there, but super pumped to be here.
No, excellent. I'm so excited to have you. As I said, I can't take the smile off my face. No, so Badri, like I said, he's the CEO of Jam, and he's had a really interesting background, and he's overcome some challenges. Actually, we were talking just before we got on air, and he's overcome some really tough challenges to really create something that is very much needed, not just in the remote world in general, but like I said, now in a sort of this sort of day and age that we're in, and the sort of changes that we're going through now, fun is a really important thing. So, what I wanted to do really is just really, Badri, just to find out about you and how you progressed in your career, because you've had a very successful career, to being where you are now as CEO of Jam.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey for me, and it's a lot of irrational decision making, as I was as I was talking to you about. At my heart, I'm mostly like a product technologist, right? So I grew up in Chennai, which is like a small city in southern India. Like a lot of kids in my generation, I was super into coding and technology and playing video games and stuff like that. Eventually moved to the United States to go to school, studied computer science, and then went on to work for Microsoft up in Seattle. And had a great time. Had a great time working for Microsoft and sort of being in Seattle. I didn't like the weather in Seattle, of course, but outside of that, it was fantastic. But sometime around 2007, I was into photography and video and stuff like that, and that was sort of the big sort of boom of YouTube. And I got this bee in my bonnet that video communication, the next step to YouTube is going to be, hey, people are just going to be having these video calls online, almost sort of Jetson style. And so that idea I found like extremely sort of intriguing. Obviously, it turned out not to be true. It took more than 10 years for that reality to pan out. But at that point, I was super excited about this idea. And so in November of 2008, actually, I quit Microsoft, decided to pack up my bags, move back to California, join a small group of people who are building a company called TalkBox, which is a video API platform, a sort of real-time video platform. And if you remember, 2008, September of 2008 is when we had the financial crisis. And November of 2008, I decided to quit my cushy job at Microsoft, move to the Bay Area. Everybody thought I was nuts. I probably was nuts for having done that. But it was mostly driven by this excitement around sort of video and the future of video. Like I said, we spent a bunch of years building our TalkBox, and somewhere along the way, we got acquired by Telefonica, which is the Spanish carrier. And all of a sudden, we went from having this fairly localized team in California to now being part of a much more globally distributed team that is spread across London, Madrid, Barcelona, Perth, Sydney, a whole bunch of locations, right? And so I, like a lot of people, got thrust into sort of the remote work sort of movement. And at the same time, we were also a video API platform. We were also a video company. We were trying to do a lot of like video conferencing in the early days. And what I quickly realized was, it's the remote work movement is the future. There's no question about it, right? There's incredible talent available all over the world. It is a lot of fun to actually sort of work in a remote and distributed team. You have a great deal of flexibility, but at the same time, because we came from a video background, we were also thinking about why what can we do to make it much more fun and lightweight.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, Slack did that to email. If you look at Slack and email, Slack just made something stayed like email much more informal, fun, engaging. And why does video conferencing imply that we're all sitting in a Zoom call for 60 minutes twiddling our thumbs, right? Like people bored out of the wits. And so the genesis of what we were trying to do with the Jam actually came out of this experience of not only working in a remote team, but also sort of marinating and thinking about real-time audio and video. And so eventually that's what got us to sort of thinking about, hey, what's the future of video in the workplace look like? And large parts of that we thought was about being intentional about culture, and large parts of building that culture is about enabling that camaraderie and the fun element you spoke about.
Mm-hmm. No, it's an interesting story, and like you said, it is a challenge building camaraderie. It's a challenge building a team, even when you're sort of sitting in front of somebody in the same office or next to somebody in a cubicle or wherever it may be. So it does make sense that you had those sort of almost like I guess you could call them visionary moments back in 2008. You know, you were ahead of the game, I guess, back then, and now it's come. I mean, you've got so many different. I don't know. There's so many different tools and applications and plugins that are appearing, but I think there's real value in this because, like I said to you before, right now, and I said to you this to you before we got on the call, when I'm speaking to my colleagues and I'm trying to get that banter and those sort of really lightweight conversations going, I end up having to look for my phone and getting sending a WhatsApp audio message. It's not ideal. I mean, it works, but you still, as a remote worker, you still yearn for those conversations, don't you?
Right, that's exactly right. And I think you hit the nail on the head. And if you actually think about what is driving a lot of this as well, is not just the remote work movement, but also what I call sort of the consumerization of the workplace. Our expectations have changed in a way where in our social and consumer lives with our friends, we might be hanging out in Discord, or we might be in house party, or we might be sending Instagram stories. And then the minute you come into work, the only sort of incarnation of video in the workplace happens to be a conference call, which is incredibly boring, has a whole bunch of issues with it in terms of how it's run, how it's structured. And so it's almost as if we have already used all of these expectations in social and consumer apps. And why can't I have the same kind of casual interaction, those micro interactions, that banter in the workplace? And so to some degree, we think it's even more important because of expectations being changed, and the fact that we're all moving to an increasingly remote and distributed future. It's enabling these micro interactions, getting short form FaceTime, the ability to sort of express myself over audio and video with the tone and context becomes super important. And the one thing I would also add is, I think there's too much emphasis being placed on sort of productivity and how do we make teams productive and how do we, drive like more efficiency. And I almost think productivity is sort of an emergent behavior of trust. If you had a team where everybody had like a high degree of trust, there's like a lot of social bonding, camaraderie, and alignment, you're naturally going to be more productive. Absolutely. You're going to trust people doing their jobs. You're going to be more aligned. So I think there's got to be a shift, and we think there is a shift happening where we've got to think in terms of sort of social cohesion. We've got to think in terms of trust. We've got to think in terms of alignment and culture. And how do you put in the tools in place? How do you hire for those characteristics? How do you build the team with that as sort of your foundational principle? And then productivity and efficiency and all of that has got to be sort of emergent byproducts of building out that organization.
I love that. And I think well-being actually is another conversation that this that Jam could get involved in as well, because all those things you just mentioned there, Badri, when you can have just those spontaneous conversations and spontaneous interactions, then you can just, it's easy to have a conversation, isn't it? Because what we
Right.
find as remote workers is, and remote managers, we find that what I often hear that the expression sort of like you have to be deliberate. So you have to be deliberate about, your productivity. You have to be deliberate about even creating water cooler moments. Those kinds
Right.
of things where that shouldn't. You don't really want that. You just want that sort of spontaneity, but you don't want to have to
Correct.
say let's create this meeting and have all get together and talk about something
Right.
that's fun.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And that's what's happening in a lot of organizations. If you look at it right now, it's like people are scheduling social events, like,
Yeah.
and to some degree, that's sort of the opposite of what you want to do. You don't want to say, hey, let's get on a call between 4 and 5 p.m. and then we're gonna have fun, right? It's got to be much more natural, and it's got to be about how do you enable those spontaneous moments of magic.
Definitely. And well, like I said, it's something that this this technology, this way of thinking, I suppose, is I guess what a lot of these apps are trying to create. But it looks like you've managed to nail it. So, but what I wanted to know, I mean, there've been challenges getting here for you, haven't there? Because like you said, you're emerging, or your ideas were emerging at a time when it was quite, I guess, quite tough.
Right.
We're economic downturn. You
Right.
know, how did you know? I mean, I suppose that this was because I guess between 2008 and now, it's quite a lot of time has passed there. What challenges have you
Right.
faced there?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting question you ask, right? Like when we first started out, we had this like crazy vision, right? Like at that point in 2008, we were like, hey, YouTube is big, people are uploading videos. The natural next step is people are going to have conversations in the browser. Now that didn't work out for a multitude of reasons back then because a network connectivity was not as good as it is right now, right? Like 10 years ago, like people were on really crappy, people were still using like dial-up modems
Dial
and
up.
stuff like that in certain places, cable modems, right? Um, I think the entire sort of the mobile movement has also sort of driven the need for people to have like much more spontaneous conversations, and so the entire smartphone movement also drove a lot of like sort of communication apps and different modalities of communication being explored. And purely from a technology perspective, I think we've come a long way in terms of like just video, audio technology that makes it sort of much more efficient to have these conversations with high quality, with blurred backgrounds. There's a whole bunch of advances that has happened in technology. So I almost treat it as sort of a confluence of happy factors,
Hmm.
which have finally sort of come together.
Yeah.
And I think finally it's been a cultural shift. Um, in terms of people being okay with video in a way where 10 years ago video was sort of just a novelty, right? Like people would get on a call and just try it out and that's about it. It was not sort of a serious modality of communication. But now I think video has arrived, right? It's more than arrived. It's prime time. And I think this entire work from home situation is just going to make that it's going to normalize video even more. My 3-year-old daughter comes up to me and says, I want to Zoom with my friends.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
So, videos arrive and
Yeah.
3 year
Yeah.
olds are using it as a verb.
Tell me about it. It's almost like it's like second nature now. It's almost like that's all they know, I suppose, and that's what they've become used to. And
Correct.
what I'd say is as well is the whole idea of I guess remote work itself. You talk about a culture shift. I think there's a like a even within this whole I guess crisis, I suppose you could say that we're going through at the moment.
Right.
There's even a new cultural shift even within that because
Hmm.
there's those people that okay, we were already on board with remote work because we've been doing it for such a long time. But then there's certain people through no fault of their own have been forced to work remotely, so they're having to get used to even things like Zoom and things like
Right.
Skype and all that sort of thing. And I think people are still getting used to video. That's my opinion. But
Right.
this now what we're talking about in terms of Jam. This is even further than that. This is like almost you're. It's almost like it's taking the friction almost out of the
Correct.
connection, you know. So it's new. It's totally new in terms of, or totally different in terms of that. You know, because with Skype you have to you download it and then you
Right.
have to arrange that meeting and all this sort of thing. So
Right.
this is the new cultural shift, I would say.
That's right, and I think it's also driven by the fact, and I think it's to your point. But this crisis, one of the things I have personally observed, and I think we were talking about, I have a 3-year-old daughter and a 12-month-old daughter, and one of the things you quickly realize as you're working from home, if you have kids at home, you're a parent, you realize that flexibility of your schedule becomes exceedingly important as we battle down through this remote work reality, which is unlike sort of being 9 to 5 in a physical location in an office where you have a strong compartmentalization of work and not work, that those lines get blurred a little bit when you work remotely, especially with people across various time zones, right? And then you couple that with the fact that not all of us are available at the same time. And I take it one step further, and I always say to people, availability is not the same as attention. The fact that I'm available doesn't mean you are now entitled to my attention.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it becomes all the more important to create tools that adapt to sort of your fluid schedule rather than the other way around, where you've got to adapt your schedule just so you can be on a meeting or just so you can sort of land up at an 8 p.m. call, right?
Yeah.
So we are taking almost opposite approach to say, hey, the new reality is that schedules are going to be fluid. People are going to be remote. People are going to be working across time zones. People want to feel connected without having to be always on. And how would you create the culture? How do you think about tools? How do you think about process? How do you think about your entire organization that accommodates that new reality without introducing a whole bunch of friction? Because I think what we have right now is the opposite, right? Like to your point, we're all getting used to meetings, but people are having Zoom fatigue, and they're like, I don't want to hop from meeting to meeting, or calendaring is a pain. I think the tools have not adapted to the reality of what we face.
Well, I think this is going a long way to sort of bridging that gap. And like you said again, when you're working remotely, you're scheduling everything, aren't you? Everything is in your calendar, even those fun moments. So wouldn't it be great if you could just not have to schedule the fun moments and just do them, and that it's done, and then you just carry on with your work and all your,
That's right.
So
That's
no,
right.
love it. I love it. So, but with you, how was your transition to remote work? I know some people take to it easier than others. How did you find it?
Yeah, it's been sort of an interesting journey for me. In the beginning, when I started working with a large remote and distributed team, it was very difficult for me, like a lot of people, just getting used to the fact that I felt a little bit disconnected in terms of what was happening, and as a lot of like a lot of leaders do, I was trying to solve that using process, right? How do you make things more efficient? How do you document things? In a more structured way. And to some degree, my epiphany was it's not about process, right? Culture is process. And I was trying to sort of take a sledgehammer to solve this problem, and you really can't solve it through process. So it was hard until I had that mental shift in terms of how I thought about remote teams and how I thought about working with remote teams. And so that to me has been sort of the learning moment, is you've got to fundamentally shift a little bit, I think, in terms of how you think about the organization and how you think about culture. And the other thing I would say is our current team at Jam is pretty crazy in the sense that it's almost as if we took a world map, we picked the worst possible airplane route and decided to build a little team across that. So we're spread across San Francisco, Sydney, Barcelona, and Perth.
Oh, wow. How many continents is that?
That's like three. That's 3 continents, right? And if you actually think about it, the only time we can all get together as a team is a 60-minute window per day. which is 11 p.m. San Francisco time to midnight San Francisco time. That's the
Wow.
only time we can all get together, right? So to some degree, I've gone from one extreme to another. Now I'm such a deep believer in sort of remote and hyper remote teams that we sort of build Jam across a super asynchronous, super like remote sort of setup in a way where not everybody can even get on a call at the same time, right? You've got to be spontaneous. You've got to be ad hoc. There's no way for you to schedule stuff.
And I think the other thing is you've got to be able to, yeah, you can't be, if you're spread across different parts of the world, yeah, you have to also have people of that mindset as well that are flexible with that way of working. How did you, I suppose, what is the makeup of your team and how did you go about sort of putting that team together?
Yeah, two of my co-founders have had sort of we worked together for a long time, so we have sort of a good prior working relationship. But essentially, one of the things we did very early on was to really hire for people who took a strong degree of sort of accountability and ownership, right? I think that's sort of an important trait to have when you're working in a remote distributed team. Followed also by the ability to deal with sort of ambiguous information, right? To a large degree, a lot of what happens in remote teams is if people are waiting for instructions or waiting for things to be sort of aligned, it becomes a little bit harder, right? And so I think you've got to think a little bit about hiring the right personalities in large remote and distributed teams. But I think to a large degree that can also be offset by the fact that it's about driving alignment. Let me step back and talk about this a little bit because I think this is sort of an important point. I think we're all drowning in unstructured data. We're all drowning in stream of consciousness data, whether it's Slack conversations, GitHub comments, Google Doc comments. We're just drowning in data. And one of the problems I think people have is not the lack of data. It's the opposite. It's you've got like too much data. It's the problem. And so the order of the day in sort of modern remote teams is about how do you quickly drive alignment? How do you quickly get color and context communicated across in a way where people understand sort of the motives and sort of the decision making and the thought process behind some of that information they're presented with? And I think to your question of how we've thought about it, we place a lot of emphasis on having these spontaneous conversations, and not just for fun and banter, but because people quickly have color and context and can be aligned, right? So there's not a lot of ambiguity in terms of why decisions got made, how they got made, what's the context behind it. And so I think finding lightweight mechanisms to get people talking to each other very frequently automatically drives alignment. And I think that's a hugely overlooked part of remote and distributed teams. I think a lot of people are focusing on information. I don't think it's about more information. It's the second order context around that information.
For me, when you remove that information, it's like removing sort of like a weight. Is if off other if it's too much information, people get so inundated with it.
That's right.
And lose their focus on the mission of what they're trying to achieve for the wider team, I would say. So no, I like that. I love that. So you've got different elements in your team, or different. What's your team made up of? So you've got marketing. You've got. Talk me through that.
Yeah, we're a really small team. We're like a 7-person team. We've got like 5 full-time people and 2 part-time contractors. And the 5 full-time people are mostly just engineers and like 1 product person, which is across these 4 locations. Our 2 contractors, part-time contractors, are marketing folks, but they're based here in San Francisco Bay Area. But the 5-person team, the core team which we have, is actually spread across 4 cities and 3 continents. Right.
So, okay, great. And let's get a bit more into the detail then about how do you guys then in your team have those spontaneous moments? How do you and your team have fun then?
It's a lot of, so we do a couple of things. Obviously, we have, just like a lot of other teams, we use Slack, and we have a lot of like banter and Giphy and sort of fun stuff on Slack, which I think is sort of important. Um, we also use Jam to have a lot of sort of asynchronous, sort of we record like little goofy videos and send it over. We use it to celebrate like interesting moments. You can record little video avatars for yourself. So every time somebody did something crazy, we record like, crazy little video avatars for ourselves to sort of celebrate those moments. But I think it's important for people to sort of get together and do fun things in spontaneous ways. The other day, me and my co-founder Adam, we randomly sort of were talking to each other, and suddenly we started playing this game called Type Racer,
Okay.
where it's a multiplayer game where both of you start typing at the same time.
Type
And
racer.
Type Racer, and it basically just shows who can type faster. And so there's a leaderboard of all the people
Oh my
who are
gosh.
the fastest typers. So we have a lot of these like really crazy ad hoc sort of situations where we're playing games together, and it's just banter, right? Sometimes we've got like people get together and play Pictionary. It just sporadically happens. And so we encourage a lot of those sort of spontaneous interactions. The other thing I would say is I'm very militant about like sort of not having a background and things like that. And so I want kids to run around in the background of my meeting. I want your pets. I want to see your dog. I want to see your cat. And so just enabling not having those backgrounds for us introduces a lot of like personal conversations, right? Like somebody jumps into the room, your cat comes in the background, and then we start talking about it. And so we try to sort of have sort of much more informal meetings, even if we were having a meeting,
Yeah.
in a way where we're encouraging a lot of personal sort of social bonding.
Yeah, I love that, because I think there's this probably a misconception about remote workers and work from home, that it's just about putting your feet up, or just sort of
Right.
sitting at home with your dog. But I think, like you said, it's about creating an environment that you are really comfortable in. That suits you, and that it puts your mind at ease, to the point that you're then so at ease that you can relax and you can do your best work, right? So
That's right.
I love that.
That's right. And I think and I think that also builds trust and culture in a way where you don't have this feeling that sometimes happens in remote teams where people are looking over other people's shoulder. You're always, some people are thinking about, oh, is work getting done? So building that sort of authenticity as part of your culture and as part of your interactions, I think just frees up. It's exactly like you said, you're at ease. People trust each other to get stuff done. They understand their social context, which they're the constraints they're working under. I think it just goes a whole way to sort of make everything much better, smoother, and more fun.
No, I like that, actually. And I was speaking to an agency CEO, remote CEO agency leader, and he was talking about the creativity side of things. And when he first started working remotely, he had real creativity blocks, and he couldn't really figure out why, because he was new to it. And then he sort of really started to really put his mind to it, and he realized that when he was working in his office, he would take his commute on the train, and in a sense, that was his moment of sort of
Right.
of thinking, and almost like planning what he was going to do in his head. So when you remove that sort of moment, that 30-40 minute commute, or wherever it was, he suddenly found himself at a loss with that. He was at home with his kids, with his wife, and he didn't
Right.
have any way of sort of, or he couldn't figure out how. And then one day he just went, and he sat on his PS4 basically, and he started playing FIFA, and he found that really worked for him. He found that that was the moment for him that really built his creativity, and he was at his peak. I mean, his wife was completely bewildered, because she was like sitting there thinking to herself, "You're on the PS4. You're supposed to be, building this business here." And she was really wondering what was going on. But he was in his best creative moment. For you,
Right.
that kind of is a long way round of me asking you, what is I suppose, how do you and your teams build that sort of creative spark and get to get things done with your work?
Yeah, I would say like twofold. I think the single most important thing, which I think everybody's got to be very intentional in a remote team, and we try to do it, and we've seen other teams do it, is actually unplugging. It's sort of doing the opposite, which is I would almost say, instead of scheduling time to like have fun and stuff like that, you want to schedule time to completely unplug. And so one of our teammates, he loves to bike and run. He basically takes a block off in the afternoon, the middle of the day, and he goes running or he goes biking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a forced time for him to completely unplug from everything and just do what he loves doing, and then that clears his mind and he can think through things, right? So I think it's super important to be intentional about unplugging as a mechanism to drive creativity. Mm-hmm. The other thing I would say, which is sort of work, is, again, if you actually think about the creative process, it doesn't happen in one go. It's a series of iterative back and forth where you riff on an idea with somebody, you go think about it, then you come back the next day, you build a little prototype, you show it to somebody, they give you some feedback, you keep going. So there's a lot of iterative process that actually happens in creativity. It's not like, hey, I'm going to block off 5 hours and finish this, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Again, I would encourage teams to actually sort of spend a lot of time with small show and tell sessions. And whether you do that synchronously with here's a 10-minute demo of something cool I built, or whether you do it asynchronously by recording a little show and tell video, I think it's important for you to communicate, or get teams to communicate little ideas in little bits. It doesn't have to be fully fleshed out, doesn't have to be fully big. But that sort of culture of sharing little snippets of information in high frequency, I think actually drives a lot of creativity. And we've found that super useful when we do hackathons, when people are working on cool ideas. People are even bouncing ideas. Hey, thought about a cool idea in the shower this morning. Wouldn't it be cool if we did this? Mm-hmm. And people record a little snippet and send it out, and then people responded, and sometimes people forget about it and move on to the next idea. But it's the ability to have those little brainstorming sessions asynchronously, mm-hmm. which I think is super important. I think what does not work is getting everybody in a call and saying, we're going to take a bunch of like sticky notes and do brainstorming, right? Yeah. That works in theory, never in practice.
No, I like that. When you talk about that and the show and tell side of things, I wish we could just show how Jam could actually make that work. And I think you should have a look at Jam, in fact. So you should go across to jam.app, and that's Jam with 2 M's, .app, and that's APP, just to have a look. And Badri, how does that work then with Jam? Because I described how I sort of do sort of spontaneous conversations with WhatsApp with my friends or my colleagues and co-workers. How does that work in practice with Jam?
Yeah, and Jam, you can almost think of like 3 sort of core elements to the application itself. You have a very simple contact list that's always on top, and we have a whole bunch of presence and conversational discovery. If Jane and Joe are talking to each other, you know that they're having a conversation, and you can quickly jump in if you wanted. Nice. So there's spontaneous conversational discovery built into it. And once you get into a conversation, video doesn't become front and center. You just have a bunch of floating heads that float around. And so you can have off in a corner as you're doing something else. Yeah. And then you could also record little Instagram stories, like snippets of video, talk through stuff, and just blast it out to your team. Hey, I was thinking about this idea this morning. Look what I built, and that's it. And that automatically gets aggregated. So it's this super simple mixture of presence, live conversations, and recorded messaging, sort of bundled into one lightweight experience.
So everybody, just have a look at jam.app. That's JAMM.app. And okay, so it sounds like, Jam is very good for different kinds of teams. Obviously, different kinds of remote teams. You've got product teams, engineering teams, leadership teams, sales, marketing, customer experience. Lots of different applications for it. And I'm looking here now. It says huddle with your team. Is that what you were just describing then, the huddle side of things, or is that a different a different sort of module.
No, that's right. It's all part of the same application where you can quickly jump into like a huddle with somebody. You can do a one-click sort of conversation with them. You could use whiteboarding and collaborate with them, or you could send recorded messages, right? So it's all sort of bundled into one lightweight experience where we're saying, let's say you use Slack. You don't really think about, am I going to text you synchronously or am I going to text you asynchronously, right? I'm just going to text you.
Yeah, exactly.
If you happen to respond, you respond. If you don't, you don't. And so we're trying to bring that same sort of modality in a very lightweight audiovisual experience. And like one of our users said, real work happens in between meetings. So it's about enabling those conversations in between meetings. We're not about like making more efficient meetings or driving a better meeting experience, right? We want you to have less meetings. We want you to be talking more and meeting less, essentially.
I like that. I like that idea. So, what are the plans then for Jam? Where do you stand at the moment, and what are your plans for the foreseeable? And yeah, it's difficult right now, obviously, with what's going on. But what do you foresee for Jam in the coming months?
Yeah, we're just excited to play a part in sort of the remote work ecosystem, right? We really think that the entire remote work ecosystem is undergoing like a really good renaissance in terms of people thinking about process, culture, tools, the entire ecosystem. And we just want to play a small part in sort of enabling that ecosystem. And so we're excited about sort of evolving Jam with all of our features in our product roadmap to enable much more lighter weight conversations, public links, much more shareable external sort of content. But just generally excited about the space and generally excited about what's happening with the entire remote work ecosystem.
And finally, what about you? What you? I mean, I know you recently. You're a father. What are your plans? Or anything? Personally, I know again, it's not an easy time to sort of make too many plans for ahead. But what about you?
No, I'm just eager to like once this is all over, we can't wait to take a vacation somewhere. I've been like stuck at home for a long time. It's hopefully the dust settles soon for everybody's sake, and we can all go out there and do something fun. So I'm just balancing. I think I was telling you when I started Jam, my 12-month-old second daughter was just born, and so we've been like wrangling both trying to build a company and have a newborn baby at home, which has been sort of an interesting challenge. So I'm looking forward to once the dust settles, and taking a couple of days off and traveling somewhere.
You and me both. Well, we will certainly be keeping our eye on Jam and you as well, Badri, just to see your progress. And what I will do is I will put the URL to Jam in the show notes, and a link to your profile as well, so people can learn a bit more. So that is you can find Jam at JAMM.app. That's APP. So that's jam.app. So Badri, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to you for joining me today on the Remote Work Life podcast, and all the best with Jam, and we'll keep in touch to see how you're getting on with in the future.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's been like incredible sort of being in the podcast. So thank you so much for having me, and stay safe out there.
Thank you. Anytime.